Hey everyone, that's me, Ann Louise O'Connell with OC Publishing, and I welcome you to this week's author journey. Wow, it's been such a beautiful fall here in little Halifax, Nova Scotia. I hope wherever you are, you're enjoying fall and keeping things moving forward. And today we have an author who is also in this neck of the woods on the coast of Eastern Canada. She's in New Brunswick. And as I said, I'm in Halifax, but Susan White is our guest today. And she was born in Moncton, New Brunswick. I was born in St. John. I think I've said that before, but moved to Halifax when I was 3. But she moved from one New Brunswick city to another. As a teenager, the family moved to the Kingston Peninsula, and she only left long enough to earn one BA and a BEd at St. Thomas University. She married a Peninsula man, built a cordwood house, raised 4 children, and established a small farm with a menagerie of animals and expanding vegetable gardens. Susan taught elementary school for 29 years while trying to fit in some writing time. Taking a deferred leave in 2006, she completed her first novel. Retiring in 2009, Susan began writing full-time. In 2012, she won the Ann Connor Brimer Award for Children's Literature for her first book, The Year Mrs. Montegue Cried. She now has, wait for this, 14 published books. So I'm very excited to bring Susan up to join me and welcome her to the author journey. Hi, Susan.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Ann. It's so nice of you to have me. And I love that pause and dramatic effect of 14 published books. Sometimes I find myself in awe or shock about that. I have a bookends that I keep putting them in. And when I run out of room on that table, maybe it'll be time to stop. But thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh my goodness, don't ever stop.
No.
And we were just chatting before we started, and I said, I think you're my favorite new author. I'm so pleased to have found you. And I'm like 14, holy moly. And I discovered you at the local authors book club at Dartmouth Book Exchange. And say hi and shout out to Sue and Amy at Dartmouth Book Exchange, because they're a wealth of resources for me to find new authors. So happy to have found you. But I had read initially one of your first books, The Right Retreat.
Kind of middle. I think it was out in the pandemic, 2020.
Oh, was it? Okay.
And my first was out in 2011. So, but yeah.
Okay. And then this was before I knew that you had written 14 books. I thought, okay, there's a new one coming out, so I really should grab that. So I did. I put it on my Kindle, Such a Winter's Day, and that just came out fairly recently, didn't it?
I got it last week. Yes. So released. Yes.
Congratulations.
I'm published with Acorn Press. Terry Lee Bulger has been a wonderful support of my work, and I appreciate that very much.
Yay. Shout out to Acorn Press and Terry Lee. Excellent. Well, let's jump in. 14 books. Holy moly. So now it said in your bio, it says that during your 29 years of teaching, you did squeeze in a little bit of writing time here and there. And what kind of writing were you doing at that time?
I've been writing as long as I can remember, really, although I do remember trying to get serious about it. I think it was in 95. I went to a maritime writers workshop at UMB. And at that time, they were set up to be like a 1-week workshop. And there were 3 facilitators, depending on the genre and the type of writing you were doing. And my first year there, I was with Joan Clark, the wonderful, wonderful author of many, many books. And she was such a support to me. And she helped me that week. I was workshopping when I had just barely started, and it was called The Memory Chair. And The Memory Chair came out. I'm trying to think what year it came out. I think it came out in 2014. Anyway, and then just trying to find time. I remember computers didn't come into the classroom until around 1990, and they were big and cumbersome, and we didn't have the internet, but I would bring home a computer in a box from my classroom on the weekends and think I'm going to use the word processing program. Most weekends I didn't even get out of the box. And then there'd be March break and summer holidays, and I think I'm going to write then. And I did. I started 2 of the books that I have finished now, the memory chair, which I mentioned, and the sewing basket, but never got back to them. And then I took a deferred leave in 2006 to write my first one. It needed to be written. It was a very personal story. And I took a deferred leave. I wrote it. Took me 10 months to write it, from September to June. Wow. And sent it to 5 publishers, got 5 rejections, sent it to the 6th publisher, which happened to be Acorn Press, and Terry Lee had just bought. And in the meantime, I submitted it to what was called then the Atlantic Writing Competition, which now the Writers Federation of Nova Scotia has that competition. And it's not the same as it was back then, but it was open, I think, at that time to any Atlantic Canadian author. Anyway, I entered the year Mrs. Montegue Cried in that competition and won first place with it, and which I was thrilled about. And shortly after hearing about the win, I got an email from Acorn Press wanting the whole manuscript. And 2 weeks later, I had the contract for that. So I forget what the question was, but I couldn't find time to write, basically, but it was always there. Right. And then retired early, like somewhat early. I was only 52 when I retired. I could have gone longer, and I loved the classroom and loved many things about it, but needed to dedicate my time and energy to writing. So went about writing my second book that year I retired, before I had won the contest and before I had the contract for my first one. So time, and it's still, I get asked that a lot. How do you find time? But I think that the passion is somewhere there, and you find a way to work zigzag through and
absolutely. Find time. And so when you retired, did you already have the plan that now I'm going to write full time?
Yes. As I said, I didn't at that point, the year Mrs. Montegue Cried, I didn't have a contract for it to be published, but I said, no, I'm going to write full time, whether, we'll see where this one goes, but it's something I want to make sure I dedicate the time and energy to.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned that as an elementary school teacher and being in education, you were kind of drawn to YA, young adult, which when Mrs. Montegue Cried and the memory chair. But you've expanded well beyond those. And I saw dystopian,
right. I was literary. Skyward was my first and only dystopian. And I may, delve into that again sometime. I don't know. 2 of my books came from dreams, and Skyward was one of those. Just a quick dream that gave me the seed of the idea. But I think, and I've heard many authors say this as well, but I think, we categorize YA, middle grade, adult, so on. I never shied away from any tough subjects. When I taught grade 4, I often get asked, were you an English teacher? Well, I taught everything to grade 4.
Right.
But I read every day, probably some days I'd read for an hour, depending on how into it we all were. But a good story, sometimes, to me, it is a care, can be in any genre.
It breaks the age barriers.
It does, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. And Terry Lee has said, I did have some publishers that shied away because it was a difficult story and a sad story. My husband always says I should give a box of Kleenex away with all my books. And I used to apologize, and I don't anymore, because I think emotion, whether it's joy or sorrow or what it is what ties us and attracts us to a good story. So I am again, I always forget what the question is, but
multi-genre
the genre writing. So as far as adult, and then of course sometimes, like 3 of my books are a series, like 10,000 Truths, my second book. I follow the same characters 15 years later in Waiting for Still Water, and then 13 years later, after several books later, but 13 years later with the same characters in Jasper's Road. And we kind of consider Waiting for Still Water an adult book, where the other 2 would be top middle grade or YA. But again, it's kind of depends on the age of the main character. You know, some of the things you leave out or put in or whatever for whatever age group. But
Mm-hmm.
it's not an easy, it's not an easy question to answer where it falls.
So what are some of the tough, I was actually gonna, it's a nice segue because, in just the two books that I've read, and I just started Such a Winter's Day, and I'm absolutely gripped by it. But it sounds as though, like you said, you don't shy away from the tough subjects. What is the main theme in Waiting for Still Water? Because that just kind of
in the first book, 10,000 Truths, Rachel is 13 and she's in foster care, and has had several very negative foster care experiences, and she ends up at a farm on the road that I live on, and it's a totally made up place. But let's come to the road and go, where's Amelia's farm? It's not really there. It's in my imagination. But she's had a tough, she's lost a mom and a brother in a car accident. And then a lot of the kids that are there with her have had real tough things handed to them. And so that element, it's not easy, their past and the things that they're dealing with. And then in 10,000 Truths, Rachel is 15 years later is a social worker in Vancouver in the East End, and in a very difficult area in the city, and loses a client, and her loses a client's child, and the client is severely injured in a very violent act, and she comes back very traumatized in Waiting for Still Water, to the foster mother that offered her so much healing and so many tools for her own trauma, and realizes that the foster mother is in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's, which again is a difficult thing to find your way through. So that's what's happening there.
Oh, wow. Okay. So let's talk about your new book, Such a Winter's Day, which also addresses some very timely, contemporary and really tough situations, in
very tough,
modern day.
Homelessness and the crisis of homelessness. It's set in the pandemic, sort of in 2021. So lockdowns kind of are over, but there's still times when I even forget now, like we did colors, when the province was red and you couldn't have you could only meet with, your closest
4 of your, right.
And all that kind of stuff. And he's been in a rooming house, and he finds himself out on the street for no fault of his own. And he's 81 years old. So he's
renovated,
plus he's been dealing with a life of he's a gay man, and he's been dealing with a life of prejudice and hard knocks all along the way. But he also followed a dream and went to San Francisco and became a sound engineer and worked in the music recording industry. So the thing was, and the seed of that idea was thinking, I drove by King Square. This is the bandstand in King Square in St. John. It's a beautiful photograph by an Ontario photographer named Ian Mutto, and I just happened to stumble upon it, and he was generous enough to allow us to purchase his photograph cover. And it's so perfect for the story, because I felt, as many of us do when we walk by people that are, homeless or certainly down on their luck, seeing them in a certain light and not seeing who they are. And I had felt that a man laying on a bench in King Square, and there's more to the story. He has a backstory. He has a past. He has passion. He has love. He has disappointment. He has sorrow. He has joy. He has all the things that make up the fabric of all our lives. And so that's where that started. And then I began meeting him learning about him, finding out who he was, just from an imagined character in my mind.
Mhm. And are you a music lover? Because, of course, as soon as I saw the title Such a Winter's
Yes,
Day, I immediately thought, you know, Winter's
exactly.
Day,
And it's
Simon and
so
Garfunkel.
I just think it's so amazing, and it's what I love about being a writer
Mm,
is the all the different layers to it, because I often have the title first for whatever reason, but the connection, like right away, I didn't know that I thought his passion was going to be music. And I
mhm,
grew up, I mean, I was born in 56. So, I've heard grew up with the music of the 60s and the
mhm,
70s and, definitely the mamas and papas and all that. And definitely, Bob Dylan and
mhm,
all that. But when I started to decide what his passion was,
mhm,
then that all came together. And actually, he was a sound engineer right in the studio when the Mamas and Papas recorded
mhm.
California Dreaming, and then it just all cascades together, which is the beauty of it.
Right. I had misspoke. I had Simon and Garfunkel in my head, but I
Oh,
knew
I didn't even
because,
I didn't
a
even
winter's
pick up on that.
day, and it
I
is
didn't even pick up on that.
No,
Yeah.
but I knew it was Mamas and the Papas. Did you happen to pick a reading to do for
I
us today?
did. I picked from just the first page from Such a Winter's Day.
Excellent.
Um,
let's do that
you
then.
want me to do that? Just a short.
Yes.
I always time my readings. I'm very careful about that. And this one says it's 2 minutes, but I
Perfect.
I try when I do readings just to jump right into the reading and not to try to give a preamble or anything. So that's what I'll do. It's the first page. First page in a bit. November 2nd, 2021. Hank walked slowly through King Square. The mid-morning sun was bright, but the wind biting. The trees surrounding the bandstand were bare, the ground carpeted with the colorful foliage that had graced the square into late October. City workers had turned off the fountain, cleaned up the gardens, and removed the hanging baskets in preparation for winter. Fewer people were milling about, but the clusters of pigeons remained. A few were pecking wildly at a Tim Hortons paper bag. Hank felt for the gift card in the pocket of his parka. Someone had handed it to him several days ago as he stood on the corner in front of the CIBC bank, but he hadn't tried to use it yet. He hated the way heads turned toward him when he walked in the door. Even when he hadn't been technically homeless, it was as if he wore a sign announcing his worthlessness when he entered Tim's. He always had enough change to pay for whatever he ordered, but the doubt and distrust were written on the servers' faces. Sometimes the person behind the counter looked too young to be employed, and sometimes too old to still be working at a job barely paying minimum wage. Hank tried not to judge either way, but Hank felt judged by everyone around him. Strangely, this came from a feeling of not being seen by those who passed him, while at the same time feeling each stare or passing glance as a condemnation. The woman had helped up off the sidewalk a few minutes ago used the word invisible. Others walked by, giving the collapsed woman a wide berth, chalking up her stumble off the curb and her bleeding face to a drunken state, and not one they wished to engage with. Apparently, I'm invisible, the woman muttered as Hank helped her to her feet. I'm Pearl. Hank reached into his pocket for an unused folded napkin and handed it to Pearl. I'm Hank. Your face is bleeding. Are you okay? They think I'm drunk. I'm not drunk, Pearl said, dabbing at her forehead. These people walk by me every day, but they don't even see me. Not a nod or, God forbid, a kind word. I watch them scurry along, living their busy, important lives. Not one would have a clue where I live or anything about me. I'm just some scary old lady to them. That's if they even notice me. And I guess falling on these uneven, poorly maintained sidewalks makes ignoring me even easier. We're all drunks or drug addicts, as far as they're concerned. Hank sensed the anger in Pearl's words and recognized the underlying hurt. A few days ago, he had stood on the sidewalk watching workers haul out all the furniture, fixtures, appliances, and discarded possessions from the rooming house on Duke Street. Everything was thrown in the dumpster as the pompous real estate agent stood smiling for the camera while handing the keys to the new owner. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. And that, for those who are listening, can sort of understand that as I started reading those first pages, I was riveted. And you really very, very quickly become invested in the characters. You have a real talent for quickly creating multi-level, multi-layered, multi-dimensional characters, which, as I said, is quite skillful.
Thank you.
And one of the things that really stood out to me as I was reading, and also from the Right Retreat, you have what people might call an ensemble cast, right? There's many characters and multiple points of view. And I want to get just a little technical. I have questions for you about and in this book and in others. I think the memory chair, you do go from present to past and back and forth. How do you keep track of all of that, the parallel storylines and the multiple points of view and where they cross over? Like, what is your secret?
Yeah, that's a great question. and I don't have a secret, but it's definitely each project I take on, it's a challenge, I guess. Actually, in this one, Such a Winter's Day, I originally had it very sporadically back and forth. In the book, one of my books, A Fear of Drowning, it's 6 generations of women, and it starts in 1918 or 1918, I think, and goes to 2013. And I have 6 different women perspective. And I wrote the manuscript for that one several times to get it to what I wanted it to be. And I wanted it to be sporadic because to me, that's how memories come to us. They don't come in a chronological order. I don't, start remembering when I was 5, and then the next memory is when I was 6 and when I was 7. They bombard us, and I wanted The Fear of Drowning to be that way. So when I started Such a Winter's Day, that's what I was doing. I had Hank's past kind of just pushing its way in and not pushing its way in any order. I wanted the present to be very chronological. So the present is dated. So it's, November, I think it starts November, whatever I said.
2021, I think.
The actual date is November 2nd, 2021. And most of those days are very, we almost see Hank from November 2nd right through to, I think, January 2nd or whatever it is when the book finishes. But his backstory, I needed it to be very chronological because I approached a couple of other authors that that play with, or I say play with that work with that, and got their opinion on it, and they felt that the backstory needed to be very precisely chronological, not to mix up the reader, and also to give that backstory the credibility and the depth that it needed. And that was a challenge. Yeah.
Oh, I can imagine. And some of the backstory also speaks to the conversations he's having, in the present day. Right. So it reinforces and it drip feeds some of the backstory, which is kind of interesting. And when the people who are kind enough to spend time with him start to realize, what this man had done in his past, Hank. So I'm feeling that Hank is the main character.
Yes.
And so he's like the connecting bit. And where those overlaps happen, and when the scene, when the realtor, when Miriam comes into Gloria's studio gallery and is complaining about the homeless man she had to step over, not realizing he's one of the people that were rent-evicted.
That she was responsible for his homelessness. And so, like I said, so many layers to that. And the backstory, the chronological backstory also, like you said, includes that, cast of characters, because we see his daughter at a certain age. And then, we see Pearl. I loved Pearl. And I remember at one point my editor challenged me whether Pearl was necessary. And I had to kind of make Pearl more
More
necessary.
relevant.
I mean, she
Yeah.
was very necessary to me,
'Cause you're like,
but I
okay.
had to kind of make her more necessary within the
Mhm,
story, although she
mhm,
wasn't pivotal to the story. But she was another person that saw Hank, and that's what I wanted. The characters that saw him, that saw
mhm,
the range of his experience, that see, saw the layers to his
mhm.
what was happening with him right now. And
Yeah.
then because I was also challenged by my publisher to make sure that I gave enough, like he came back into St. John in the 80s, and his aim was to connect with his daughter and grandson, and it didn't happen, and there was all kinds of reasons for it not happening. But I needed a cast of characters back then too, to
Yeah.
give his life some meaning and some depth, because other than that, why would he still be hanging on at 81 after suffering so much? And
Right, right.
yeah,
Well, and I don't, no spoilers. I'm hoping, because I'm only about a third of the way through, but I'm hoping Marvin comes back at some point.
oh,
But
oh
yeah, don't say that.
yeah, no,
But
he does.
one of the comments that Marvin said, and just, let's go back a little bit to some of the underlying themes. And you
Yes.
mentioned that Hank was a gay man in a time where it was difficult to come out, and admit that. But Marvin says to him at one point, change will never come unless we are brave enough to own who we are, love who we love, and wear what we damn well want to wear.
Mhm.
And, simple sentiment, but you know what I mean? We're still
So
saying that today, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And again, like when I first discovered Hank, when he popped out of my imagination, I didn't know he was gay. I mean,
Mm,
it's not, and I try to write what I feel rather than think, oh, I need to have a gay character, or I need to, that
mm,
sort of thing.
mhm.
Um, but the struggle, and the struggle, like you say, is still very much ongoing. It's different. We lay claim to being more open-minded and more inclusive,
Mhm.
but still so much of a struggle. And yeah, Marvin definitely comes back, and he wears
Oh,
whatever he
good.
wants to wear.
Yay. Good. Well, in our when we were chatting again backstage, we touched a little bit on research. So what is your research process? And like, do you start writing and then go, oh, wait, I need to have a little more, understanding or background, of this
Right.
era, or,
Definitely. I mean, that's the fun of it. And I don't know how authors existed before the internet.
right?
I can
Spend a
want
lot of
something.
time in the archives.
Oh my goodness. You can just go to something, and you can go to a video of something, and you can, whatever. And it's wonderful. It's an ongoing thing.
Mhm.
I got my first research grant, my Marion Heb research grant a couple of years ago, to research my current work in progress. And it was the first time that I actually spent some time, like within a museum and within some archives, and with
Cool.
an archivist to try to, film. And I just basically, made notes and, craziness. But the research, it's so much a part of it. I try to be as accurate as possible. I try to be timely. I
Mhm.
find the wonder of it sometimes is I want something to be happening, and I'll research it, and something is happening that I can work in, or I can figure out, like in Fear of Drowning. The San Francisco earthquake happened right at the right time for my character's parents to be killed. I mean, obviously, because you're writing fiction, you can play with that. But I
Yeah.
try to be as accurate and timely and truthful, and
Mhm.
to that history, and then it just opens up so many windows and doors that I go through, and it's
That's
yeah,
incredible.
I like that part of it for sure.
That's incredible. And so, as a writer full time, and you had also, we talked about, you had been into farming for
Mhm.
many years as well, and so, but that's taken a back seat. But
Yes.
fortunately, you've been able to hand that off.
And I used to be a very seasonal writer. I said once I retired from teaching, I had the schedule that I went back to my desk when the teachers went back to the classroom. So I'd write from September to June because we put a huge garden in, and I spent hours every day in this huge garden. I don't know who I thought I had to feed, but anyway, but I enjoyed it. But I found that that was really writing time as well, because all the time that I was out in the garden, mindlessly, weeding and hoeing, and my mind was always going. I'd sometimes run into the house and, jot something down. And same with working with animals. My husband was in the military and was away a lot. And we had, we always had animals, and I looked after them primarily when he would be away, and the kids, of course, helped as well. But all that process of spending time in nature, and, that nature just fills me up, and I think is part of the process as well. So
I think that's amazing. And I think that's very much part of the fabric of most authors. When you're doing some kind of a menial task or just absorbing the world around you, there's always like a storyline bubbling up, and or a character.
I remember initially I got my husband to buy me one of those little recorders, because I thought, when I have a thought, I need to record it. It became useless and not needed very, very quickly, and I do believe that if you have a good thought and it's going to work, it'll stick with you, and it'll come back. It keeps, and that's like some of these books, they just keep coming back. And so then I revisited, like Jasper's Road was one that I just kept putting aside and writing another book, and then I go back to it and putting it, and it came back when it needed to. And
eventually,
I have people that would like the fourth one in that series, and so it's kind of percolating back there. And when the time is right, perhaps it'll find its way to the page.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I can't believe we're already at our time, Susan. That went just so quick. I really, your insight and advice, and hopefully folks who are watching, are quickly looking at your website. And I want to bring that up again, SusanWhite.xyz. You are not seeing a typo. This is the actual website address. And Susan also has a blog, so make sure you pop on over to her website, have a look at the blog, and sign up for her newsletter, or sign up, watch, and see what's going on. And what's the best way to follow you, Susan? Is that the best way?
My author page on Facebook, and this website, which also includes the latest Facebook posts and the blog posts, would be the best way to follow me. Okay, also, my contact, I do, if I get emails sometimes from people asking for advice and, encouragement or whatever. So it's on there as well. So, and and through Acorn Press, or Nimbus.
On the website. Terrific. Well, 14 books. I've got a lot of catching up to do, and I'm thoroughly enjoying Such a Winter's Day.
Oh, thank you.
And congratulations on the launch. And we've got so much more that we can talk about, so we'll have to have you come back another time.
And enjoy your retreat next week, Ann. And it's a wonderful opportunity you give to fellow writers. And all good. And we're all, we're Atlantic Canadian writers, but we're, it's a large network, a wonderful network. And it's been very, I'm also recruiting authors for judges for the Writers Federation of New Brunswick. Every year I start recruiting, usually around the 1st of November, to get judges for our 8 categories. I think we already have one, so I'll just need to. But just that network is such
it's so important. Yes. We have a very supportive community in Atlantic Canada, and I'm just so happy to be, even a small part of it. So
I really appreciate the time and the effort you put in, and your research and your interest in my career. Thank you very much, Ann.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure, Susan. We'll have you back sometime soon.
Okay. Take care. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you for joining us on the author journey today. I hope that you enjoyed our conversation with author Susan White, who recently launched her 14th book, Such a Winter's Day. And I hope that you're having a wonderful day and reading a lot and writing a lot. And we'll see you next time on the author journey. Bye for now.